This FedGov Today program is sponsored by Broadcom. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, what's the dream to lock down your agency's endpoints?
Being able to get predictive and help the defender understand, based upon what's happening in the environment, what's likely to happen next, so they can get ahead of that behavior.
Garrett Lee of Broadcom on FedGov Today in just a moment. First, though, on FedGov Today TV this week, how and when you can move money around during the shutdown. Former IRS Commissioner and former OMB Controller Danny Werfel will tell you what's cool and what's not. And former DHS Chief Procurement Officer Soraya Correa explains the most important things to tell your team during and after the shutdown. You can watch the show on the FedGov Today YouTube channel anytime, and it's available on our website at fedgovtoday.com. The Defense Information Systems Agency is in month number 9 now of offering an endpoint detection solution to strategic partners. DISA says one feature of the service is automation of lower-level cyber tasks. Garrett Lee's Regional Vice President for Public Sector in the Enterprise Security Group at Broadcom. Garrett, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. What are some of the risks that you're seeing inside the department or all across the federal government when it comes to endpoint security? Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it, Francis. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. Well, let's think about it. So a fighter jet's weakest point isn't always the airframe. Sometimes it's the laptop in the hangar, right? So cyber is a new contested domain. Visibility at the endpoint's mission critical. None of this is lost on the Pentagon. I mean, it's not just a tech problem, though. That's a national security issue. So when we think of the department's battlefield operations, most people picture tanks, jets, ships. But today, one of the most critical front lines we see is the endpoint. So the laptop in the soldier's hands, a remote sensor in a combat zone, or a network on a forward operating base. The consequences of those being breached is catastrophic. So, it's an important conversation for us to have.
That conversation is continuing and intensifying across the department, too, because every uniform leader that I talk to talks about computing and data and so on at the edge. And those are all of those endpoints that you're talking about. What I think is really interesting is those leaders who are by trade warfighters, not cyber people, are thinking and conscious of the vulnerability potentially of those endpoints.
Without a doubt. I mean, the department faces huge hurdles in protecting such a massive, global, highly complex cyber environment. The scale of it alone, thousands of networks, massive scale of devices, different weapons systems. The DoD's got such a huge, enormous surface area to secure. And another factor is the contractors. I think it's a known problem that many of the defense industrial base contractors have failed historically to secure, controlled unclassified information. And that's a massive vulnerability for our Pentagon and our military.
The contractors piece of it, they're trying to solve with the cybersecurity maturity model certification process. And it's interesting to me to watch that because there is so much apprehension in the vendor base about CMMC, how much it's going to cost and all these things. And those are certainly viable concerns. But at some point, Katie Arrington I saw not too long ago, who's been a CMMC evangelist, for a long time. I mean, this is not new for her to be pushing this. And she basically said, I'm paraphrasing, but I think accurately, this is the security of the nation, guys. So kind of get on the train or don't. But that to me signals the importance of the mindset shift, at least around the vulnerability of the department, especially through endpoints, because in the past, at least, those have been the easiest points for adversaries to penetrate.
Yeah, look, Katie's been passionate about this, and for all the right reasons. And it can be a tough pill for particularly smaller contractors to swallow, but it's a necessary step in the defense of our nation. The sophistication of our adversaries, state-sponsored cyber actors using advanced TTPs, fileless malware, lateral movement, and often their pivot point is from contractors. I mean, this is a very necessary step in how we protect our nation. That and the work that Randy and team are doing around zero trust, we're seeing these advancements. It's the complexity of the environment and the scale of it means it's making meaningful steps, but there's a long way to go too.
You wrote recently about what you call the hidden costs of just good enough endpoint security. What does that phrase mean, and what are some not I don't want you to pick on people, but situations where you've seen that mindset kind of leads to a situation people don't want to be in?
Yeah, I think cyber practitioners have a statement that compliance doesn't equal security, and I think a lot of folks truly understand that, and it can be challenging to step beyond that and actually into a really secure posture when sometimes compliance is the goal. But even with that, the complexity of the systems and the different environments that the Pentagon and our military departments have to contend with. Disconnected environments is a great example to answer your question. So many of the systems that operate in our military operate without consistent internet access. So cloud-based solutions aren't always feasible. You have the challenges around zero trust and making sure that it's adopted. The vulnerable flanks that are still open are a challenge. And just good enough security means you're focused on checking the box with compliance and not actually improving the security posture. We're working in the right direction away from that, but we're certainly not there yet.
What would have to happen to get from where we are to being in that end state that you just described that we're still working toward but not at yet?
Well, I say this tongue in cheek, but a budget would help.
Well, fair enough.
Yeah, but the beyond that. Recognizing that the endpoint is both the first line of attack and the first line of defense. It's an important function for our nation. Visibility across those millions of endpoints, whether it's a container running in a cloud region or a soldier's laptop in the field, sensor on an allied base. I mean, it's the foundational requirement to protect those systems. Implementing zero trust, I mean, it's cliched at this point. It's not a checkbox, it's a journey. And the endpoint is the pivotal frontier in that journey. And I think that's not lost on our nation's warfighters and our nation's defenders. But I think that they have to recognize that some of the larger overarching solutions that they're selecting have meaningful gaps that need to be filled.
What are the technological requirements to at least try to keep pace with the threat landscape that's accelerating from China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, particularly in this endpoint area?
Yeah, in the endpoint area, we're seeing, let's differentiate between cloud-ready endpoints and the massive scale of what our nation's defense and warfighters operate that are disconnected or DDIL environments. They're bandwidth constrained. We could be talking about shipboard networks or submarines and forward operating bases in hostile combat zones or intelligence community SCIFs. We have a lot of operations within our government that are not cloud ready. They're air gapped. And so when we're talking about a command post in a disconnected environment, you can't send data back to the cloud for analysis. So the EDR has to be able to live and work on site. So in some cases, the most advanced, most exciting AI heuristics technologies that are cloud native aren't appropriate for the full breadth of our military operations. And so it's important to make sure that in those environments, just as much as in an environment with a persistent internet connection, that when an adversary gets in, it's the lateral movement, the persistence, the time they remain undetected that becomes the mission risk. And so in DoD, not all those environments have that constant internet connection. So for deployed military operations, classified networks, in these situations, cloud solutions just aren't viable. So the solution is our military and the Pentagon are looking back to security tools that can be deployed in hybrid, on-prem, or virtualized environments, REDR, for example.
I'm sure that the same technologies that were useful for security in a pre-cloud environment are not useful today. But do you think some of the same strategies, some of the same approaches to security in some of those environments that you just described, would some of the pre-cloud approaches and strategies and so on work as one tries to secure those air-gapped environments today?
Without a doubt. Yeah, great question. I mean, the fundamental security basics are always present. And I think there's a false sense of security that can befall operators of fully air-gapped environments where well, we're not connected to the internet, so we can drop some of our need for the critical cyber tools and defenses that we would see in an internet facing environment. Well, that's certainly not the case. I mean, we've seen insider threat take root in our intelligence community. It's not just protecting against that. There's the same demand for rigor in cyber defenses and cyber observation for visibility within those secure environments, and in part because they house some of the most sensitive information, and so it's absolutely critical that we still monitor them for adversary TTPs, preventing the dwell time of an adversary, whether it's somebody with credentials who is acting as an insider. Having the right network, endpoint, and data security strategy is vital in air-gapped as well, but again, not cloud ready. So a full suite of cyber tools is still needed there, along with all the right vulnerability management, patching, and the usual hygiene.
We were talking before we went on the air about how artificial intelligence is impacting some of our personal interests and things like that. What do you see here for the impact that AI can have from both an offensive and defensive perspective, both for the bad guys and for the good guys?
Yeah, that's a whole topic in and of itself.
Yeah,
and one
that's
I'm
true.
Keenly interested in, but nevertheless, I mean, I'd say it offers multiple perspectives. One, the adversary is most certainly leveling up with these tools as well. The democratization of malware and its creation, if we look at agentic AI, there's a scary conversation to have there. If we look at how, from a defensive standpoint, we can level up our scarce resources and cyber practitioners and analysts much faster because the 900-page user guides that hit the desk with a thud can be summarized more cleanly, and you can interact with them in a more natural language way, as well as analyzing attack patterns. And we have private AI models that we operate where we feed our EDR systems and our EPP solutions. What happens when an adversary begins to operate in an environment? What are the next things they're going to do based upon what they've done? So much the same way that we started out with spell check, catching mistakes as we type, and then we moved beyond that to grammatical corrections. Next, it became predictive. We start typing based upon the string of things we've typed. The next three things are going to be X, Y, and Z, and they make suggestions. We're doing the same thing with TTPs and attack patterns, kill chains that we've seen operating in the world to breach systems, and being able to get predictive and help the defender understand, based upon what's happening in the environment, what's likely to happen next, so they can get ahead of that behavior.
Will those models get better exponentially as they incorporate more data from more sources and more sources?
That's true. Absolutely, they will. I mean, anytime you're feeding a model more data, the model is going to get stronger. But I think the other important aspect is making sure we have the right guardrails in place so that we don't have leakage to public models. I mean, it's certainly more important than ever to ensure that as our military operations and intelligence community and our government at large adopts AI, that they do so in a thoughtful way that maintains the compliance, the sovereignty, and the autonomy of the data that they're operating. And so private AI models, they're absolutely going to be the right way to approach that challenge for our government.
Garrett, it's great to talk to you again, as always. Thanks for joining me today.
You bet. Glad to be here.
You can read more about security in all kinds of environments on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. The FedGov Today podcast is back tomorrow. You'll learn how to leverage your agency's technology posture post-shutdown from former OPM CIO Melvin Brown. If you don't want to miss that, you can follow the FedGov Today podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on the FedGov Today YouTube channel, or on demand at fedgovtoday.com. I'm Francis Rose. I'll talk to you then. Thanks for listening.